Hi, everybody. We're back with another session. I hope all the sessions so far have been value adding. I hope you learned something new, something different from what you already knew before joining us today. Our next session is about rewriting the consumer playbook, how AI search engine redefines discovery, loyalty, and brand building. The traditional marketing funnels are evolving into dynamic, real time discovery experiences where trust, personalization, and relevance matters more than ever. We'll explore how leading consumer brands are changing the strategies from storytelling to loyalty programs. And to put some more information about this thought, we have a few panelists with us. I will start with Eric first. Eric is former CMO of Instagram business with senior leadership roles at YouTube and Google. With a career spanning some of the world's most influential consumer technology platforms, Eric brings a unique perspective on how storytelling, creativity, and trust intersect with AI to drive consumer engagement. Then we have Deepak. Deepak leads Unilever's food solutions business in North America, overseeing a multi-billion-dollar portfolio. A seasoned global operator, he has built and scaled brands across Asia, Europe, North America, bringing deep expertise in consumer trust, brand building, and growth in fast-moving categories. Then we have Angelic. Angelic is the former chief marketing officer at PepsiCo and the co-author of You Should Smile More about building workplace culture that works for all. With decades of experience leading iconic consumer brands, she's one of the most respected voices on how CMOs must adapt to shifting consumer expectations and merging technologies like AI. Then we have Joe, who is a part of Pepper Content. He is the moderator. Joe is a seasoned marketing leader with a track record of building go-to-market strategies for growth stage companies and advising CMOs on navigating AI-led shifts. Joe brings a sharp operator and consulting expertise to guide this conversation. We also have Anand with us. He's the senior partner at McKinsey, leading one of the top AI practices in the world with a solid set of experience across large enterprises. He's also the leader of Lily, McKinsey's own Gen AI platform. With this, I will hand it over to Joe. Joe, please take the session forward. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Very honored to be here with this all-star lineup of marketing leaders. So let's jump into it with a little opening lightning round. The idea here is quick 1 to 2 minute answers to get us started, get the energy going a little bit as we explore the future of AI search in the consumer enterprise. So as we all know, AI search is fundamentally transforming how enterprise brands are discovered, trusted, and chosen. And we hear a lot about future-proofing for the AI age. It's one of those buzzwords that's taking over LinkedIn these days. But what does that actually mean in practice? Eric, let's start with you.
Oh, great. I get to start. Thank you so much. It's really quite an honor to be here with you all. And what a great question to start us off. So almost everyone I talk to right now thinks about future proofing in terms of the technology and the tech stack, right? And while, of course, that is partially true, people that know me and know what I talk about know that that's only part of the story, right? And I think that more than the tech stack, future proofing is about people. The tools that we use are going to keep changing and evolving, but what doesn't change is how human beings decide what's worth their time and what isn't worth their time. And so especially as we start to see more and more AI search, whether you call it GEO or AEO, collapsing kind of everything into a single answer, the question's going to be, when everything's compressed into a single line, does your brand still matter? And most of the companies I'm talking to right now don't really seem prepared for that because they're really obsessed with the plumbing instead of focusing on building something that really breaks through the noise and gets to something that people actually care about. So future-proofing, not just about the tech, also about the people.
Love that. Deepak, let's go to you next.
Yeah, can you all hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, thank you. Sorry, was on mute. No, that from my perspective, working in the world of food, there is pretty significant transformation happening in how people eat whether it is the search for global flavors and for food items, whether it is healthier eating, whether it's more customized meals, think GLP-1 diets, think vegan diets. So all of that is changing, and people are looking for solutions. I had a slightly different take on what Eric said. So, and I think that sort of gives a different perspective on the same situation. I think my big initial thought is, in the world of traditional search, people were served up options and they still sort of plowed through it and made up their mind on where they wanted to go. In the world of generative search or AI-based search, uh, I think brands matter still. Maybe I'm biased given where I come from. But the question is, how does your brand turn up and show up in that moment of consideration? And what do you need to do as a brand? And I believe that the things that brands need to do to turn up in that solution, which the AI is going to provide for people, especially in my industry, is going to be very different from what we are all schooled and trained to do in a world of traditional search. So that is a bit my initial call to action.
All right, you guys are both hitting on this, like, how does your brand show up in that moment? How are you influencing that? I think that's something that we can come back to a little bit later. Fantastic. Angelique, let's go to you next.
Okay, it's so great to be here. I've had the honor to work on a lot of large brands, a lot of small brands. I advise a lot of brands now. And I'll tell you, there's a fundamental in brand building that I think could never be more true than it is today, which is it matters that your strategic brand narrative is coherent and consistent. And that's always been true, but I think it's even more true today when we're moving from keywords to meaning, and how your brand shows up consistently and coherently actually matters even more than it ever has.
I think it's a lot for us to chew on. And Anand, let's finish it up with you before we get into our first section.
Maybe a contrarian thought here, Joe. I think it's impossible to future-proof, frankly, at this stage. So we've, as I remember in the digital era and the e-com era and every era in the past, there's always been this concept of how do we future-proof? How do we prepare? The best thing we can do is be prepared that you will be unprepared as things happen in the technology space and the evolution happens. With AI and with the search, what we find with a lot of our clients, and frankly, what we find with our own organization, it is fascinating to see AI adoption happening at a very different pace across every organization. People are thinking about it differently, operating differently. Marketing is now to agents, not to humans. So how are we actually thinking about AI to AI marketing capabilities, search capabilities that are actually happening versus to humans and individuals? So I think, Joe, it's not about thinking about future-proofing. It's actually thinking about how we can all be the fastest learners in the world to try to keep up with what change is happening so that we can actually hopefully survive in what we do in the AI world.
So no future-proofing, but perhaps adaptability, the ability to learn quickly, to do deep learning as our pathway forward, be prepared for the unknown. I really, really like that. All right, well, the first round that we're going to get into here, our first block of questions, we're going to focus on kind of the reset that has to happen inside of enterprises, kind of building on what you said, Anand, a minute ago. One thing that I've observed is that there is that, rapidly different pace of transformation inside of companies. And it changes a lot from startups, which you saw really jumping on AI right off the bat in 2023, to enterprise, which has been a little bit slower to get on it. So how are we really adapting to this change? And Eric, I'd like to start with you, because you led some massive changes in discovery during your time at YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify. How do you see consumer discovery changing with new AI-first platforms? I mean, just this week, OpenAI revealed its own social app, which looks interesting and terrifying at the same time.
Interesting and terrifying is definitely a good way of putting it. You're totally right. I mean, I've been seeing this kind of change start pretty early. Even at YouTube, where I started, back in the early 2010s, I saw people not really so much searching anymore, but a bit of surrendering to the algorithm, a bit of surrendering to whatever was going to be served up. And then when I moved over to Spotify as their head of brand, we had just acquired Echo Nest, one of the largest music discovery platforms ever. And we started to see and develop Discover Weekly, a playlist that was 100%, and it still is 100% algorithm driven. So it kind of feels like we're in a similar moment, except it's just kind of faster and more powerful now. Discovery happens in this one invisible moment. And that's really different from the past. We used to talk at Google about the zero moment of truth, which was the zero moment of truth was the database of intentions when you go to do a search. But that zero moment of truth is completely shifting now to a completely different model of how people think about searching. And so the question is, what's going to tilt brands in your favor? And it may not be who shouts loudest. It may not even be who spends the most, but about sort of the equity and content that's built up over time that exists out into the ecosystem that then our new AI systems are scraping to find you out in the world. And so, if you're not showing up as one credible, going back to what Angelique was saying, with some congruence and some coherence out there, then it's going to be really hard to show up at all. And we're just now starting to see the tip of the iceberg from the shifting from the zero moment of truth being through search to a pre-zero moment of truth happening before you even put your intention into the chatbot.
Well, maybe that new zero moment of truth is something that Anand was talking about a second ago, right? Where discovery and search and social was still generally about marketing to humans, right? Okay, we want to shout the loudest, we want to be the most attention grabbing on social, right? To attract the engagement that's going to drive us to get the most views within the algorithms that dominate all of our social platforms. With search, it was about let's create the content that is going to, earn the trust of the algorithm to surface against the queries that humans are making. But to Anand, what you said a second ago, this is now shifting into this area of marketing to AI, which is a completely different paradigm of how to think about this. So you're on the front lines here with Lily. How do you think that teams should rethink their marketing strategy and workflows for this new era?
I think it's an excellent question. And to me, Joe, we need to reimagine the workflows that existed in the past when we think about engagement. So engagement with customers, engagement with marketers, engagement with products, all of that is fundamentally shifted when we think about what's really happening today from an AI standpoint. How you and I choose to interact with a product or interact with a service has evolved. I am interacting, and I'm not just talking a ChatGPT or a Gemini or a Claude. I'm actually talking about how I shop is changing. How I search and look for items is fundamentally rewritten and changing. Therefore, I think number one, you have to reimagine the workflows with an engagement. How are we as individuals choosing to engage with the products, the services, and the capabilities? Because if we start there, you then pull the string backwards. The next element is let's now reimagine, therefore, how you market to Eric, to Angelique, to Deepak, to Anand, or to Joe, because you're no longer marketing to them. You're marketing to their agents or their AI personas that really exist. When I go search for a trip, or when I say I want to go from point A to point B and this is what I want to book, when I do that, I'm no longer even asking for, is it this particular airline or this particular hotel, or I'm just saying I need to go from point A to point B, give me the outcome. It's fascinating to me. So we use a product at McKinsey called Skylink, for our travel booking. Skylink is an independent third-party product. It's formed by a former McKinsey alum, and he created the product. But essentially, through a Slack channel, I say, I'm going from point A to point B. Please book the travel. That's the end of the interaction and conversation. It now goes and speaks with agents. It now books identifies the properties that are within policy. It then books the travel, and it then lets me know it's in your calendar. You're all set. You're done. who have we marketed to in that particular case? Where did that airline, how did they know that I wanted to choose a particular airline? So I think, Joe, it's reimagining the engagement model with AI, and then reimagining, therefore, how and who we're marketing to when we think about the AI era.
I wonder if you can think of, and you can keep this anonymous, right, in terms of the company, but any specific examples that you've seen in the companies that you work with where, okay, we had this one workflow or way of doing things in the past, we had to then rethink this for this new era. And this could be related to AI search or a different, AI example, but I'm just curious if you can think of a specific example of how kind of that workflow and model had to change.
Yeah, if I might do it slightly differently, Joe, while I could speak to certain clients, we'd have to be careful there, right? So what if I told you we changed our workflows where using Lily, 93% of all employees at McKinsey now use Lily for all their workflows. And let's take an example of I go to serve a client on a due diligence exercise that a private equity firm may be doing. When I go out and do that, what I fundamentally do now is I no longer take a large team. I have to take a group of agents with me. And I take a data analyst agent with me that can churn and process certain types of data sets with pertinent industries. My workflow includes simulating an investment committee and what would the investment committee ask questions about for that particular due diligence that's happening on the company. I have an investment committee, a multi-agentic framework and orchestration layer that we use to simulate an investment committee, and so on. And if you think about other companies that do it, I do think if you take retail or if you take the consumer sector, this is, and of course, Deepak would know this way better than anybody else would, at least better than me. But at the end of the day, the consumer sector has said how I choose to identify a product, how I choose to then select the product, and then how I choose to use the product. It's different than what it used to be before. So therefore, the workflow, those organizations, the consumer organizations have said, I can no longer offer you the product in the traditional way of just, oh, this is the best product because of this particular feature that it has. No. I have to show you many more things to engage you in that, and the workflow on how the brand campaign management happens to bring that to you. It's AI powered. I'm no longer using multiple agencies to go do that. I can bring that to you and deliver that to you much faster and better.
I love that example. And when you think of, last little follow-up here, when you think of kind of the timeline of driving that transformation within your team, like how fast did that happen? And were there any specific things that you did that you felt like unlocked that new way of thinking about how we operate?
I think that we at McKinsey, we launched Lily in June 2022. That's 4 months before OpenAI introduced ChatGPT to the world. So we've actually been on this journey for a little over 3 years, working on driving that. However, Joe, the adoption only happened this year primarily, right? Like really scaling that because they felt I can trust. And what are the factors? Trust the data sets and the insights. We trust that there are multiple data sources that are actually being used. It's not just web. It's tons of proprietary insights and information that are being brought together to actually give you a much better answer quality that can just be gotten versus going to an enterprise version of any capability that might be out there, Gen AI platform that might be out there. So it's building the trust, having the right data sets, and having the ability to deal with all the metadata, unstructured and structured data in a much more effective way than ever been able to do before. And once you do that, it's also saying, look, it's giving me an answer that gets me 80% of the way there. I now need to think about the last mile and delivering that. That's taken time, and most of the organizations we've seen also have been on a multi-year journey, and I realize we're still only in 2025, and it'll all change next year. But it does take time to drive that adoption and that capability.
No, yeah, that's the big question, right? Like, can you trust it? Can you trust what you're getting from these systems? And I think at most companies, the answer to that is often no. So smart to kind of pinpoint that as the turning point. And really interesting to hear that even at McKinsey, it took until this year to really get to that point. Deepak, I'd love to go to you next to kind of hear about how this is playing out at Unilever. So you lead kind of the food services business there, which you alluded to a second ago, is a really fascinating category, right? Because of the way that AI can advise the way that you can construct different diets, different, GLP-1 type, meal plans, as you alluded to. And so it's just a really fascinating category when it comes to AI search. How do you think that AI search is really going to reshape the way that we develop trust and preference for specific brands?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I've been with Unilever 30 years. Large part of my life has been in retail, and now I work on the food service side, and I'm seeing this play out in a pretty foundational way, I have to say. I've seen many moments of technology impacting the marketing workflow over the last couple of years. I think this moment is particularly transformational. And the reason why I say that is, and I'll sort of give my response through the lens of a practicing marketer, so a little bit more on content and how do you turn up in front of the consumer. I talked about the fact that you need to turn up in those AI searches. It's really interesting. I saw a piece of research which said that AI assistants disagree on what recommendations to make. So only 17% of AI assistants make the same recommendation for the same prompt. So, how do you turn up in a moment where the consumer is looking for a solution is important, and it's not so clear. And I think that is going to really put a lot of pressure on the brand folks to figure out how to turn up, all the marketing to machines, etc. I think there's a second piece which is linked to how you turn up, which is this whole area of how can you be verifiable in what you say versus being vague. I think the age of marketers making generic claims and unsubstantiated claims is gone, because if you don't have the right citations, the right nutrient list, the right declarations, you will not feature, and the algorithm will penalize you for being vague and generic. I like that because I think it gives a competitive advantage for brands that believe in science and invest in science and who can substantiate their claims versus pass-alongs. So I like that, and I think that will help us. And the other interesting part, just think about how we all prompt now. I'm sure all of us have learned that the first thing you do in a prompt is to put your persona in. And therefore, from a food point of view, you'll say, I'm a sports person, help me with this, or I'm a mom trying to feed 3 kids, or I am a food lover. Each one of us is now prompting in the context of a persona. And the impact that it has on brands is that brands have to now respond to multiple personas in an authentic voice. You can't set yourself up as a brand talking to a mom and look to appear with an authentic voice and tone in front of a active gym goer who's looking for personalized solutions. So it really sets up this challenge of how do you appeal to multiple personas? How do you be hyper personalized in your response without losing the core of what your brand stands for? So I would say that brands, and with Unilever, this is what we are now really trying to figure out. How do you crack the narrative? How do you be verifiable, not vague? And how do you turn up? Because that will definitely drive trust and preference.
Do you have any insights on how you do that? Because that's a really great question, right? Like, how do you turn up so that you're answering in the right tone of voice and approach to all these different personas? Are there any tactics that you suspect work?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is how do you, I think Angelique mentioned that. I think you've got to be really, really sharp, firstly, about what are the core, what we call distinctive brand assets that are there. What are the things that how do you want to turn up first? And then how do you adapt that for different cultures and contexts? You can't do one without the other. And, there is an art side to it. There is a science side to this also. In the search days, in the traditional search days, there was a lot of effort put on how do people search. I think there's a lot of learning now that is required on how do people prompt. And you've got to get a kind of a framework to understand, what are the prompting styles, and then use that in the way you develop content to turn up in that search.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Also loved what you said around the specificity, right, of kind of your value props. I think brands have been addicted to these sort of vague, jargony value props for the last couple of decades, but no one is asking ChatGPT, like, what are some brands that can help me revolutionize my diet, right? They're asking for very specific inquiries, and that's how your sort of content, your value props need to be structured, which ideally ultimately leads us to maybe a better world of marketing copywriting for once. Angelique, I'd love to come to you now as we sort of start to wrap up this portion, because a lot of what I hear from CMOs is this change management question. I know this is something that you work on a lot in your advisory work, where before, search had very tried and true metrics that we could rely on. We could show traffic, clicks, impression. PageRank is honestly one of the easier sides of marketing and content to demonstrate success for. But now AI search is throwing that all out the window, right? Our clicks are down, position ranking isn't in clear, Google search changes is even making it harder for us to see past kind of the top 10 and top 20 where we rank. How would you recommend that marketing leaders kind of reframe ROI and success in this AI search era to the CEO and the board and other stakeholders within the organization?
Yeah, this is such an important change management aspect, which is answer the question, how are we going to measure success? And I feel like this is, again, it's like easy to say that, and it's not a throwaway, because there's a lot of stakeholders that need to be brought along who have various levels of understanding of even what's happening. And one thought on, there's the measures of brand health. Now there need to be measures of semantic equity, like how the pieces of AI get measured. But exactly how you measure it is a tactical thing. I think the principal thing is, how are you going to get everyone on board? And a quick story, if I may, when I was running Pepsi, and this is years ago, but when we were going through digital transformation, which was very analogous, like a lot of things were changing, and we used to prepare for the Super Bowl and the big ads, and everyone was expecting us to measure success by the USA Today ad meter. And a lot of people, the board, the senior leaders, the bottlers, like all these people who mattered, would open up USA Today. And if Pepsi wasn't at the top of the list, they would think we had failed. And the year that we changed to do the Super Bowl halftime show, it was a huge effort to make sure everyone understood how we were now going to measure success. And it was about being the most talked about brand on social media, which was like, we had to educate people. What did that mean? How were we going to get the data for that and make sure everybody was clear on that? It's a big process. It shouldn't be taken lightly. So articulating, measures of semantic equity and getting stakeholders to agree, yes, that is how we're going to measure success. It's a very important step.
Was there a specific way that you sort of told that story or evangelized that within the org?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's very attractive is no one wants to be left behind. No one wants to feel like they're the, old traditional person who's not up to speed. So it's a teaching opportunity, like, hey, something new is happening. Here's what we're seeing. Here's, what the experts are saying in terms of how to measure success. So here's what we're about to try to do. And people want to be, brought along on that journey. I'd say there were definitely people who sort of got it quickly, and then there were the people who came along begrudgingly. But you get those people who come along quickly, and you get them to help bring the others along. You want to be with the cool kids who are on board with change.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, let's get into our next section now, where we want to get a little bit more tactical on what winning in this AI search era looks like. And I'd actually love to start with a question that we just got in the chat for Anand. I know you just answered in the chat, but I'd love to hear you elaborate a little bit further here. So Miriam asked, I'm researching how AI-driven discovery reshapes enterprise strategy. And I love your perspective on enterprises facing a real trade-off. Do they optimize for short-term visibility in AI discovery, or double down on building brand equity and loyalty that can resist algorithm shifts? From your perspective, how should boards and CEOs decide which side of that trade-off to lean into? This is a great question.
Yeah, I mean, I put an initial thought into the chat because chats are always fun to try and give short answers, not long answers. But to me, Joe, I think, Miriam, this is a great question, right? As I wrote in the chat, I feel it's impossible to decide to only do one. and make it binary. It's like, I must do this only, or I must do this only. And I feel, as we think about it, brand equity and creating that for every product, every service, every brand, it's just necessary. There is no way around that, and we must do that, because that's how consumers will and customers will say, okay, I have some loyalty towards this particular product or service or capability. So I think that's very, very important. But on the same side, the consumers really and customers really want to be met at their point of need. And we believe in this concept of meeting customers at their point of need. What is it that I am choosing to do, and where is it that I'm at in my journey for a purchase, my journey for a particular transaction? That point in that journey that I am, I'd love for the service to meet me there. As an example, if I'm shopping for a trip, and if in my journey I'm still in the, I want to go to Australia for a week, tell me what to do, that's one part of where I might be in my journey. There might be another part is, I've already filled out 5 days of my trip. I just need to know what to do the last 2 days, and I don't need help with hotel. I don't need help with the car or flight. What I do need is what to do locally. Those are different points of need for that particular customer. And therefore, when we think about, discovery, I'm still discovering along that journey. I'm still discovering, even though I've filled out most of what I need to find, I'm still trying to discover what I do for those last 2 days. So if you walk away from that, that's going to be a challenge. And if you don't meet that customer where they are, you've now lost an opportunity for them. But at the same time, the brand equity and loyalty, I consider that important. Okay, you're providing me a service. You've taken into consideration my preferences, and therefore you'll have my loyalty to continue in that. You'd have to keep building that. So that's why, Joe, I think it's an and situation to the question that Miriam has asked.
Right, and you probably have kind of different modes of the org working on to each of those things, right? You have different campaigns that are going towards each of those two goals. I think, Eric, let's turn to you with another question from the chat, which feels very related to me. So the question is, your human OS framework, huge fan, emphasizes internal alignment and brand integrity. So in an AI discovery world, how do you see brands balancing the drive for machine readability, like all those things that we need to do to get cited by AI, with staying true to a brand's human voice and identity?
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that in the chat, but I just saw it up there, and it is something I think about a lot. I'm still really stuck on the point that we had before is, yeah, it may be true that we're starting to market to agents, but we're still marketing to human beings. As of the latest Pew Research stat, only 34% of people have already used ChatGPT. So we are in a world where we're thinking about this all of the time, but most people are still falling back on the fundamental. One thing that I've always seen in my work is that human psychology lags technology disruption trends. And what still really matters in terms of brand relevance is always going to be something that's probably near and dear to your heart, Joe, which is storytelling, right? And the ability to tell a consistent, coherent story to both shape and reinforce memory out in the world. And, maybe before, especially in recent times, it was about creating some of that brand love through the stories that we tell in longer segments to shorter and shorter segments. But these days, it's really much more about showing up and figuring out how you balance that larger brand love and that brand equity that's at the heart of your human brand, with putting lots of bits of content out in the world that can be discovered and found, not just through traditional searching, but through the places that are scraped by these engines, whether it be TechCrunch, The Times, Wall Street Journal, showing up in lots of ways. My biggest concern, though, in the AI world that we're seeing is that we're just going to see a lot more filler. And that's one of the things that I really want to, think about really hard is, as we're creating more and more content out in the world to become more and more discoverable and more relevant, telling more stories to reinforce and shape memory, how are we putting out things that also reinforce the quality of the brand and the integrity and the values of the brand. So it's not just what we see across our social platforms now, which is a lot of AI generated slop.
Yeah, and OpenAI literally just launched a TikTok for AI generated slop app this week.
I mean,
that I find really fascinating. It's gonna be nothing but AI generated videos in the feed. So it's definitely an interesting new world that we're entering. I think your point is poignant around, right? Like, we have a skewed perspective of the adoption of AI search because we all live within social circles, workplaces where people use it a lot. I think the one place where I would counter that I think we might be underrating it a little bit is the fact that Google is quickly shifting to an AI search by default mode, right? Like the other day I was talking to my 73-year-old mom who's a veterinarian and barely uses a computer, but she's like, I was talking to the AI the other day and I'm like, you're using ChatGPT? And no, she just went to Google something and asked her to use AI mode and suddenly she's using AI. So while other shifts, like e-commerce is still only 20% of purchases, have been generally really, really slow. But this is almost like if you walked into a Walmart and immediately by default, you're buying things online, even though you're physically in the store, right? Because even if you're just going to the place, the platform itself is automatically shifting your behavior. So I think that's the one place that we might see things a little bit different in terms of adoption. But your point around the importance of brand is really, really important. And I think that is the shift from this tension that, we felt for years with SEO, that I've always felt as a marketing leader with like, okay, do I want this to be the best piece of editorial content it could possibly be? Or am I optimizing for search? And how do we find that balance? But now we're in this world where, okay, actually the biggest influence in AI search is what mentions we're getting from the media, from Reddit, what user reviews are saying. I think you could argue that this is going to shift what we prioritize as marketing leaders in the future, right? So Angelique, I'd love to come to you with this. Spent your career really heavily in brand. Do you foresee with AI search this maybe pushing us a little bit more to a renaissance in brand and PR investment versus the kind of very demand performance marketing era we've been in the last decade or so?
Well, the phrase that's coming into my mind is, if the question is, should I, eat healthy or exercise? It's both. You should do both. And it was always also this true of performance marketing and brand marketing, both. And, but on the topic of, the renaissance of PR and, that type of marketing, I would say it's probably a rebirth, honestly, because it's about influencing both humans and machines. It's like the influence aspect of it. And I think PR type of work or that type of media has a lot of potential. And the thing it's triggering for me is a story from my time at BlackRock when I was running brand there. We used to debate brand versus reputation. And it was, between marketing and corporate comms talking about what we put out, but what we get back, right? And which is more important and how do they work together? And again, the thing is that they both matter. But I think the reputational aspects of PR type of things and the authority that it gives you, the authenticity that it gives you for your authority is really important and should be a lot of attention thought about how to do that well and how to do them together, because you can't just do one or the other. They have to be coordinated.
And so how do you do that? Like, what's an example of kind of balancing those two in concert?
Well, I think, the first thing is make sure, if brand and reputation sit in different places, that they coordinate their work. But also that it's not so much an engine anymore as much as it is an ecosystem. So how do the dots connect, and how does whatever activation we're about to do connect the dots between, outside authoritative voices repeating what we have said, and what inside voices putting things out there. It was something that we actually studied at BlackRock, which is how ideas spread, and the role of advocates and detractors, and it isn't just the obvious. It isn't obvious, right? It isn't like, the most views or the loudest person or the most spend. Like, that's not actually what's going to matter. It matters like how expert is the person, or who follows them, that can amplify it. And so that ecosystem of influence, I think, is the way to think about it. And so to get a little more specific, it's like, who are the voices of authority in your space? How might they pay attention to what it is that you're saying and validate what you're saying? And I think thinking about that influence ecosystem will play right into how the AI algorithms are actually rewarding authority.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic connection. I really like that, the influence ecosystem. It reminds me of this idea that Amanda Natividad from SparkToro has written about how their entire content strategy there is built around targeting not their target audience as much as what they call kind of their content audience. So who are the people who influence their buyer, and how can they feed them with the type of research, reports, thought leadership that they're going to then write about, and that's going to fuel their content machine. And I hadn't before tied that to kind of AI search, right, as an overarching strategy, but I think that's exactly right. Deepak, I'd love to go to you next with another kind of big tactical question that I'm hearing a lot from enterprise CMOs, and that we touched on a little bit earlier, which is really this question of like, how, when you're at a global enterprise, do you balance that global consistency with local personalization when AI search is really making that in a lot of ways more difficult than it was with traditional SEO, which was very geo-based?
No, it's a good question. And, a couple of foundational thoughts. I think there's a really nice line, which I like a lot, which says that technology loves scale, but technology is local, in its impact. And, this is the tension point that's there. And I personally believe the book is still being written. This has nothing to do with AI first discovery. All in the last couple of years, all the technology that has come in has put this big tension on, global consistency versus local excellence. I have, over the last many years, had the opportunity to look at this from a global perspective. And when I did global roles, regional perspective, local perspective. And I think my perspective is, I'm a big believer in this concept of freedom within a framework. And that has to be very deliberately led by the leaders. And it requires, that is where, for me, the focus on building an enterprise tech solution is important. That is the foundation. That, I think, is something that's part of the framework that allows better security, seamless data flows, and also helps for the independent fact checking and the verification. Our claim substantiation process now in this world will have to be even more tight. And then we need to give the local freedom. So that's a little bit where I think this moment is going to demand that organizations really lean into this freedom within a framework context. And I think the best example that comes to my mind is, the brand, we all need, the brand needs to speak with one global voice, but in many different accents. And how do you get that balance is, I think, what needs to be done. And I think for me, it starts with a foundational enterprise technology stack for this.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And when you talk about that foundational enterprise technology stack, is there any specific technology you're thinking about, right? Especially as, in a lot of ways, AI tools are disrupting the kind of traditional software stack.
It is a work in progress, I have to say. So, I'm not at liberty to give some details there, but you can be sure that there's a lot of work going into strengthening that. All
right, we're not going to get any breaking news on Unilever's tech purchasing decisions here. That's fair. That's fair enough. I don't want to get you in trouble. Okay, we have about 8 minutes left. I want to jump into the thing that without it would not make a panel, which is some predictions. So I want you all to imagine that we're meeting again here. The year is 2027. 90% of the internet will probably be bots. Will just be AI versions of ourselves here, I guess. But imagine that we're here a couple years down the road. How will AI search have transformed enterprise brands? And what do you think will have, what's the most surprising prediction you have for what that will look like? Angelique, let's start with you.
Well, I was thinking that we know that marketing is being disrupted immediately as a function. But I think that if I were to try to predict in 2 years' time, the surprising thing is about how teams will be built, like an organizational design and the impact on HR, because the teams will be humans and agents, and how the agents fit into the org design and how talent is found. So that's my prediction, is that the HR function is going to change actually as much as the marketing function.
I mean, I think we're already seeing that HR teams are trying to fight AI generated applications with AI filtering, and it is chaos. Deepak, let's go to you next.
Yeah, so Unilever has recently launched this new framework of how to build exciting brands, or SASSY brands as it's called. And, SASSY stands for more science, more aesthetics, more sensorials, more said by others, and more young and spirited. I was thinking about this, when we say said by others, the focus is often a lot on influencers. I think one prediction I have is we might be surprised how much AI search might feature now as a credible said by others in the overall influencer ecosystem, maybe 2-3 years down the line.
So are you thinking specifically AI influencers?
For sure.
Very interesting. And you think that'll be like, what can you imagine that looking like? AI actors, celebrities, podcasters, TikTokers, all of the above?
Could be. For sure.
Very, very interesting. All right, Anand, let's go to you next.
Sure. I think, if I may answer, Joe, one thing that I predict we'll be surprised by, but perhaps one thing I predict that won't change in 2 years as well. But I think on the prediction side of what I think will happen is the way users, consumers, customers decide to interact with products and services, decide to search, decide to engage, decide to leverage, decide to do anything with it. I do predict that today, I love the stat that Eric just shared of how many users we actually have using ChatGPT or different tools today. I think it'll be double or triple that type of numbers that we see today. And we will all, the vast majority of users will fundamentally say AI is the way I do everything in my life. And the reason I say that, Joe, is the age, if we think about digital natives many years ago, the AI natives are my kids. They fundamentally will be the consumers and shoppers even in the next few years. And, my own cohort, my own age group is already transacting to, I don't have time to plan a vacation, I will use an agent to plan my vacation. And I therefore think the way we consume and experience and see and feel and purchase and transact will completely be rewritten in the next 2 years. The one thing I don't think that will change, though, is customers, the concept of trust will remain true in 2 years from now. In fact, we might actually be even more skeptical of things that are marketed to us in 2 years from now than we are today, because we might question, who sent that to me? Why did that get sent to me? How did they know my preference that particular way? And do I believe that is actually the right way that I should be thinking about things in the future for my consumption, my product? So I think, Joe, the question around trust that we all fundamentally ask ourselves, do I trust this source? Do I trust this agent that is marketed to me? I don't think that. I think that trust thing might change. Actually, maybe we're going to be looking at that even more carefully in 2 years, but that'll be a very important part of the equation going forward.
And do you think that gives birth to greater emphasis on human curators or individuals you trust, or does it manifest in some other way?
No, I don't think it's necessarily to human. It's more that customization, the level of customization, the degree of precision with which you understand, the understanding of my preferences and loyalty, These things are just going to be paramount when you think about, as a marketer talking to the future consumer, you'll know that they care about those things significantly. Therefore, they have to trust it to believe in it. It's like, take a product that I trust fully. If you market it to me or a service, there's a higher likelihood I'll be, more inclined to purchase or more inclined to transact. But if it's not something I know of, and if I don't have loyalty to it already, I might be a little bit more skeptical, and therefore my trust might be a little bit more challenging.
All right, Eric, take us home.
Yeah, no, I'm still reeling over Deepak's, the AI influencer universe that we might be living in. So thanks so much for the nightmares that I'm now going to have about that. I'm an internal optimist, so I'll end with something optimistic. Because right now, I think we're starting to see a lot of algorithmic flattening, where a lot of things are starting to look the same and feel the same. But I think in a couple of years, and maybe this is a challenge for marketers, is we're going to see a lot more quirkiness, a lot more edge, a lot more people trying to figure out what distinctiveness looks like as the flattening curve gets steeper and steeper and everything starts to sound exactly the same. People are going to need to break out of that sameness with quirkiness and distinctiveness.
The human edge. I love it. All right, well, thank you all for your time. This has been a fascinating panel. I learned a ton. I hope everyone in the audience did too. And I'm going to pass it on to Dia for a little bit of a closing thought. And we wait for her to appear.
Or her AI.
Yeah, AI would be faster.
I was going to say, we know it's Dia, right? Okay, here we go.
Sorry, there is a little internet issue that we're facing, and it is me, it's not AI. Thank you so much, everybody, for everything that you spoke about. I personally made some notes, something that I learned. And I think by now we all understand the urgency to adapt, the urgency to understand what's happening with SEO and GEO. Thanks again. Thank you, Joe, for moderating this. Always a pleasure to have you with Pepper. And to all the attendees, we have another session coming up that is about the new AI search playbook for enterprise growth, structuring people, processes, partners, and products. So stay back. I will see you in the next session. And in between these two sessions, you can still go visit the Peppers Geo Clinic. You will find the button right next to your agenda section. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Joe. Thanks, Anirudh. I will see you.